Well, the highly anticipated and honestly quite hyped remake or modernization of the original Risk of Rain has been out for a few days, and like many of you, I'd never played the original before. Sure, I've got the game, but the wonky multiplayer systems, as well as the fact that I just preferred Risk of Rain 2's mechanics and gameplay flow so much more, I never got into the game and didn't end up playing it at all. Instead, waiting for this remake of the original game to see what Hopoo could do in order to modernize a game that is at this point 10 years old and attract players such as myself were absolutely lured by the amazing game that is Risk of Rain 2, and of whom really wanted to try the original vision for this franchise in a renewed light. Although the first game didn't even look bad even today, as many of the 2D games made by indie developers tend to do so, the updated sprite work and the animations that Hopoo have created has been able to present the original Risk of Rain game in a completely different light, looking absolutely fresh and fantastic, with the art style of the game holding up tremendously, with the increased fidelity of the overall stages, survivors, and the enemies you'll face off, making this a really tight package that really does well to envision the artistic prowess of the original Risk of Rain game, where you can innately feel the strings of the original game humming through every part of this modernized version. The artwork in this game, in addition to the animations, it looks absolutely superb, and I was actually shocked at how much the presentation value of this game outclasses the original Risk of Rain game, where it truly feels like an entirely new game in many aspects, while keeping the spirit of the original alive through many other aspects. I enjoy a lot of platformers and games with absolutely gorgeous sprite work, so the transition from being used to playing a 3D and completely revitalized Risk of Rain 2 to that of a completely different art style and even dimension wasn't as jarring, and the game really felt natural to play, especially as it retains what is at the heart of the Risk of Rain gameplay formula. In addition to the art style and overall aesthetics of the game, the wonderful soundtrack is back in full swing, with the original composer for both the first Risk of Rain game and Risk of Rain 2 not missing with this game's soundtrack either, remastering the prowess of the original Risk of Rain 1 tracks, modernizing them and bringing some elements of Risk of Rain 2 tracks into this remake, making it an absolute joy to listen to as you continue destroying all the enemies in your path to glory. I understand that half the magic of the Risk of Rain games is finding the best item and survivor combinations and exploring these new and entirely expansive stages with new items to get and gameplay systems to figure out. So the footage of mine that I'll be using will be quite limited to only the first few stages and characters you unlock as soon as you boot up the game or very early into doing your first few runs, because I don't want to ruin that magical feeling of finding things in this game on your own account. Anyway, let's get into the discussion of the overall gameplay, bosses, and enemies in Risk of Rain Returns. Honestly, if you're a big fan of Risk of Rain 2, I think the transition to this game is quite a smooth one, especially with the upgraded presentation value of this game, in addition to the much more modernized controls and overall gameplay systems. In the original game, the controls were quite wonky, using arrow keys and different keys on your keyboard in order to attack enemies, which when the game gets especially crazy on a good one, might make it hard to maneuver around enemies, which could make the overall gameplay experience quite frustrating. However, here you can choose from a variety of different control schemes, with one specifically tailored to those of us who are used to playing Risk of Rain 2 and its overall scheme of controls, which means shooting and using your alternate ability with the mouse and the same keyboard presses such as R and Shift for your utility and other attack ability, of which made the switch to this game completely natural in every aspect. This is something of which is a big upgrade from the original game, which is quite outdated in terms of its controls, and they are also adding horizontal aim with your mouse, meaning that the way you will be killing enemies in this platformer will be extremely similar to how you were doing it in Risk of Rain 2, albeit in a 2D scape. Now, the overall gameplay here is absolutely fantastic. If you've played the original game or Risk of Rain 2, you'll feel right at home with the gameplay loop in this remake, as you'll be traversing around these super colorful and uniquely designed stages, while also looting up and attacking the enemies in your path, while you slowly progress from one stage to the next until you get to the point where you can tackle the game's final boss, of which I'll not say anything about in order to not ruin the surprise, but all I'll say is that it was an absolutely amazing boss fight, and the different attacks the final boss has makes it an absolute joy to fight. Although in Risk of Rain 2 there is a lot of jumping around and teleporting from place to place to get to a spot where chests are or to take care of a bunch of enemies, this sort of platforming is fully emphasized within this remake. So if you for some reason are not a fan of platformers or you just can't stand them, then maybe this game might not be for you, despite its gameplay loop being absolutely amazing. There is a lot of damn platforming in this game. You'll be continuously jumping onto ropes, getting from one stage to another. And as I mentioned earlier, these stages are absolutely gigantic. It takes so long to explore these stages, and sometimes finding the teleporter in itself was a mission for me, as I kept getting lost in how large these stages are. But once you get into the game in a few runs, you'll get a grip of how to traverse these stages and find the teleporter and all the items you need in order to beat the game, or just get your character to a point where you can't see anything on the screen, which is, let's be honest, the whole point of these Risk of Rain games. The chaos of this game is very comparable to that of Risk of Rain 2. I'm sure you can remember when you've got a ton of different items, destroying every enemy on your path, your screen filled with the outlines of hundreds of enemies as you slowly mow them down in succession. This exact feeling is preserved in Risk of Rain Returns, and with the newly added stages, items, and quality of life improvements within this remake in opposition to the original game, this feels like a completely different Risk of Rain package that you can dig your teeth deep into and really spend hours becoming enthralled by the world and life around you. Risk of Rain Returns in many ways feels like the original game in the essence of how it is played, but slap on a few DLC worth of content and you've got a game that far exceeds its predecessor, and it is without a doubt the definitive way to experience the original Risk of Rain game, especially for people like me who had never gotten into the original game but were absolutely hooked into the adrenaline-inducing game that was Risk of Rain 2 in all facets. The bosses in this game are ones quite familiar to you if you played Risk of Rain 2, with bosses such as the Imp Overlord and the Magma Worm being in this game, in addition to a few unique bosses to this game, as well as a couple of bosses they added as a part of the remake package that is Risk of Rain Returns. The items are also similar to Risk of Rain 2 in many ways, but there is enough equipment and items that are unique here across the board, of which entirely differentiates the game from its successor and makes it an entirely conclusive package that feels like a different game, with these items also adding to the variety of the gameplay, making every run, just like Risk of Rain 2, feel drastically different to the last, with the different item combinations you get creating an entirely new experience for you every time. Overall, this game is super refined and feels like an entirely tight and polished package, with a good few survivors that are different from Risk of Rain 2, having different items, while retaining what makes the Risk of Rain franchise so special, the gameplay loop that has you coming back for more every time you see that death screen. Quickly, I just wanted to add a section about how my personal experience with this game has been so far, especially from the perspective of someone who got into Risk of Rain 2 very early into its early access period and didn't really have much thoughts about ever trying the original game until this remake popped around. If you feel that you're not going to enjoy this game as much as you did Risk of Rain 2, maybe because of the extra emphasis on the platforming in this game, or the fact that the game's 2D orientation might throw you off, especially if you, like me, are used to the 3D and sprawling environments of Risk of Rain 2, trust me, that won't be a problem at all if you're truly a fan of this sort of gameplay loop and the unique package that Risk of Rain delivers in terms of the power you get from stacking items or picking different survivors or getting what you consider a god run. The game, like I stated earlier, was super natural to get into. I didn't feel any gripes from the fact that the game was 2D, and I actually felt right at home, especially with the gameplay loop of collecting items and running to the teleporter being present in this game, making it in many ways just feel like an extension of what I loved about Risk of Rain 2, albeit in a different orientation. The game is truly superb on all fronts, and if you, like me, have never experienced the original game, this is your chance now, because the package that has been developed within this remake is something truly remarkable, and I can't wait to sink countless more hours into this great game, and I truly recommend this game to all of you who, like me, thoroughly enjoyed every aspect of Risk of Rain 2 and just want more of that fun factor that it provides, especially if you're playing the game with your mates like I am. Well, I think my verdict on this review is quite an obvious one, but at the game's current discounted price of only 12.5 USD, this is an absolute steal for a game that is jam-packed with so much damn content and fun to be had. And the fact that it has the addicting gameplay loop of all the roguelikes out there, this is a game that you're going to want to pick up. And I highly recommend this game to everyone who wants more of that Risk of Rain glory, as Hopoo has truly delivered on all fronts in revitalizing this game into the modern day.